Hi everybody, and welcome to our first flipped collaborative session for this unit, Identity, the Early Childhood Professional. I'm just going to go through the assignment and some other information to help you get started on this assignment, but please look out for the date for the live collaborative session. So make sure to watch this before the live session so that you can come to the session with questions and so that you can put some questions on the discussion board in the Assignment 1 forum. Let's get started now. So the first assignment is 2,000 words, plus or minus 10%, which means it can be between 1,800 and 2,200 words. It's a report on the current state of the Australian early childhood profession, and it's due on the 9th of April at 5 p.m, which is week 5. If you need an extension, please let your ELA know, and if you require one more than 48 hours, you need to apply online, and I've provided the link there, and you will need some supporting documentation. So where to start with an assignment like this? So the best thing to do is to highlight the key words as you're reading the assignment, and we're going to look at that in a minute. Read the rubric, and I know many of you are in final stages of your degrees, so you've done this many times, but remember to always use the rubric and check it before you submit your assignment. And check the allocated marks for each criteria within the rubric so you know how much word space to allocate to each section. So this is assignment 1. You want to research and report on the state of the early childhood profession in Australia. Your report will aim to define and describe key characteristics and complexities of the profession. You will discuss and critique key contemporary trends, policies and movements within Australia. And I know that does seem quite a lot to put into a report, so I'm going to break it down for you. But basically this report is asking you to research and report on what early childhood looks like today. What's happening today that's good? What challenges are happening today that need to be addressed? Has this caused some complexities? So has this caused some problems in the profession? And you need to compare these to what is happening overseas. So you want to talk about Australia and overseas as well. Now, everybody's essay in this assignment will be different, and it depends on which particular issues you want to research and discuss. So I think it's more important about following the format for a report, as everyone will be researching differently here. And the first place to start is your weekly reading. So the weeks 1 to 4 are really going to help you with this assignment. So make sure to look in the module section at Canvas, as all the weekly readings will be in there. So if you haven't had time to participate in the weekly activities, make sure to go into modules, and you'll see that there's weekly readings for each week, and that would be the best place to start with your research. And sometimes with these this sort of research, it does take a couple of times to read through the readings to really understand what they're saying, sort of to get your head around it. So that's why I'm making sure I'm doing this collaborative session early, so that we can start researching, as that's a major part of this assignment. You need to research and report on the state of the early childhood profession. You will define and describe key characteristics and complexities of the profession. So that's really saying define and describe what it looks like now and what's causing it to have problems or challenges. And you'll discuss and critique key contemporary trends, policies and movements within Australia and internationally. And this really means you'll discuss what's happening in Australia to what's happening overseas. So you may not talk about trends, policies and movements. You may just be talking about policies or trends, and it really does depend on your research, as I was saying. Now this needs to be set up in a report. So we're going to go through the setup of this report. And the first thing you need to do is an executive summary. This will be 150 words approximately, and this is only a guide as to how to set it up, so please keep that in mind. Don't panic if you're a little bit over or under. This is just a guide. So your executive summary is sort of like a short, sharp summary of the whole report. You want to talk about the key issues that you're going to talk about in your report, outline your findings or what you're hoping to find, and you want to give the reader a brief overview of what this whole report's going to contain. And this is going to be about 150 words. Now, we'll discuss it at the end as well, but there's plenty of resources in the student resources giving examples of how to do an executive summary. And I think it is similar to an introduction, but probably more detailed. So don't panic if you haven't done one before. The best way to go about this is to find an example of one in the student resources toolbox, and this will give you a really good place to start in relation to how to word it. So the next thing you need is an introduction, which I'm sure you've all had plenty of practice at if you've got to this point in your degrees, and your introduction will be about 200 words, maybe less. It depends what you're going to put in there. So you're going to introduce the early childhood profession, provide a rationale, which is the reason for your report, showing some understanding of the current trends, policy and movements impacting on the early childhood profession, just like you would a normal introduction. But you talk about why you've chosen to research the particular things that you're going to research. Now your findings, this is the bulk of your essay, and this is about 1,350 words. So you can set this up however you like. You could do it in the section of, you could do it issue by issue. So you could do 4 paragraphs on issues, and within each paragraph talk about what the issue is, why it's caused the early childhood profession to be complex, the strengths and challenges of the issue, and how it relates to overseas. So you could do that issue by issue, or you could weave all of the discussion together, talking about the issues in relation to overseas and international trends as well. So there's plenty of ways to do this, and it's like an essay. You can really do it however you like, but within this section you do want to be identifying your issues and the characteristics and complexities, the strengths and challenges, and the key policies in relation to Australia and international. And as I said, you can probably, a number of paragraphs will be used here, maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs in this main findings of your report. And again, please look in the student resources to find an example of the findings written in a case study in a report, as this will really help you set it out. Now, you will need to research here, but I've just come up with a couple of ideas to get you started on the sort of things we're talking about in this report. One of the strengths you could be talking about could be the introduction of the early years learning framework and how this has impacted the profession. You could talk about the complexities that's added to the profession and why it was introduced. You could talk about the fact that it hasn't been revised for 10 years. So are there any possibilities here to revise this framework now that it's been going for 10 years? For a challenge, you could be talking about the issue of ratios or the lack of men in the profession. You could talk about the confused roles of leaders within the profession. So you could talk about the issue like a team leader, a manager, a director, an educational leader, how it's very difficult to define the leadership roles within the profession and how this looks like in Australia and overseas. And another challenge you could talk about, I thought here, could be the different attitudes towards early childhood teachers and professionals. Why aren't we paid as much as primary school teachers and high school teachers? Why is it not seen as valuable in early childhood in education? So there's a lot of research on that as well. And as I said, weeks 1 to 4 do talk about this quite a bit when we're talking about our identity. So they're just some examples to get you started on this essay. You could also talk about how the Early Years Learning Framework, which is used throughout Australia, how some other states have chosen to use other documents as well that work alongside the Early Years Learning Framework. So New South Wales hasn't done this, and I'm not sure why, so you could look into that. You could look at the literacy programs that the Northern Territory uses alongside the Early Years Learning Framework, and how that's added to the complexities of the profession overall. So there's a lot of research that could be done here. The final section is a conclusion, and you do have a conclusion like you would in an essay. However, you need to provide recommendations, which means you need to go back to your which research points and which challenges you have described in your report, and suggest some ongoing recommendations. Now, you can do this in point forms, but it's not basic point forms. They need to be detailed point forms like paragraphs. So it would be good here, you need to use academic referencing to validate your ideas for your recommendations. So there's no point just saying a statement. It needs to be validated and reinforced to show me why this recommendation could be valid in the ongoing early childhood professional development. Please take a look in the student resources, as I said, if you're not quite sure how to do recommendations. But you'll have your conclusion followed by, say, 6 dot points, detailed dot points, which will be recommendations for your findings on this report. Now, the assessment criteria, which you all know, the rubric, there's 3 sections for this assignment. And as you can see, we've got knowledge and understanding, depth and breadth, and academic expression. The first 2 criteria are worth 40%, so that's very substantial in your overall grade, which indicates that it's really important to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding and depth and breadth, which is your research. So you can see here where you need to really put in the work here, the research and demonstrating that research. The final criteria is academic expression. I'm going to go through the rubric in a minute, but this is just some tips here. Use the weekly readings and additional references as well. If you're really going for those high marks, you need to research much further than the weekly readings. Have a look at the student resources, which I've been talking about, where you can have a sample report, which is in there, there's the link, and some academic writing tips. This will really help you get started, because sometimes if you haven't done a report like this, it's difficult to visualize it, but once you've seen one, you will understand what it's supposed to look like. So if we look here at their knowledge and understanding, we're going from basic understanding all the way up to high distinction, which looks for in-depth. So your understanding here is really important, and the research will help you demonstrate this understanding. If you look at the wording, it's got basic for path, well-developed, thorough and in-depth, and that really indicates the level of understanding that needs to be required here to meet this first criteria. And the second criteria, which is depth and breadth, which means your research. Again, if you look at the words clearly, it really indicates to you the level of research required in your work. And I haven't gone through the third criteria, that's academic expression, which we'll talk about further in the live collaborative session. I've provided some formatting and referencing here, which we're all aware of, and some extra tips, which will be discussed further in the live session. I hope this was a help here to get you started on this first assignment, and look out for the dates for the live collaborative session. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all on the discussion board soon. Thank you.